Why did the salaries of the Sioux Falls School District teachers drop relative to teachers in the rest of the United States or in South Dakota or in Sioux Falls? This chart shows how state funding of education relative to the rest of the state budget has dropped in the past 14 years. In 1998, the first full year of the current per student funding formula, state aid was approximately 39%. Next year, it's proposed to be 29.4%. And on a $1.1 billion budget, that decrease amounts to $110 million in 1 year's time. While the percent of the state budget spent on Medicaid has steadily increased, notice that it was state aid that decreased to make up the difference. Medicaid is the blue line on this chart. State aid is the red line. Only in the last 2 years has the rest of state government, the green line, felt the pinch of declining state revenues and increasing Medicaid obligations. State aid, on the other hand, has steadily decreased over the past 14 years to allow the state to divert those dollars to Medicaid. To be perfectly clear, the increase in Medicaid has been funded by diverting dollars from K-12 education to Medicaid, while the rest of the state government went without impact until 2 years ago. Now, you might hear some officials say that schools have declined in enrollment, or that the state has sent you one-time money. And this chart doesn't include those adjustments. And if you're particularly keen on this subject, you might want to know what the impact is of increased property tax relief factors on this equation. Here is the same chart with an adjustment for those 3 factors. The black line. As you can see, when you adjust the calculation to account for declining enrollment, one-time money, and increased state property tax relief dollars, artificially inflating the state aid amount, state aid has dropped even further as a state budget priority. The bottom line is that state government should not cite declining enrollment as the major factor in sharply declining state investment in K-12 education. Because if it weren't for increasing property tax relief dollars, the state's adjustment to our schools in this state aid formula would look far worse and not better. Here's a comparison of the per student increase in the state aid formula to the increase in state general fund spending for Medicaid and all the rest of the state government. As you can see, with only a few exceptions, state aid increase lag behind the rest of state government and the Medicaid year in and year out. Only in the last few years has the rest of state government felt the pinch of a tight budget. Overall, if the governor's budget becomes law, since 1998, the per pupil allocation of the state aid formula will have increased 25.7% versus an increase of 44% in the rest of state government.
Dugard says the state gives $90 million more to K-12 education every year than it did 8 years ago.
Even in fiscal year 09, when our revenue went down, school funding went up. In fiscal year 10, when our revenue went down again, K-12 funding went up again. This is the first year right now when education funding was not cut, it was frozen. So to say that education hasn't had its share is really it's an unfair way to look at it.
The governor justifies this discrepancy by talking about a $90 million increase in funding to schools since the beginning of the Rounds administration. Using the governor's figure of $90 million, it yields a 28% increase in state aid over the past 8 years. In comparison, over the same period of time, the rest of state government has increased $752 million, or 56%, 2 times the increase in the state aid formula. And that does not include Medicaid.
This shows in a pie chart the 4 areas in which we spend our general funds. Education, as you can see, receives about half of our general fund dollars. 36% goes to taking care of people, and Medicaid is the big part of that fraction.
Just as the state takes care of people, so do we. We take care of children. And you know what? We have to take care of children regardless of what we receive from the state in the state aid formula dollars. Taking care of children clearly costs more than 3% or inflation, whichever is less. We don't have a blank check from the state that helps us pay for those costs beyond 3% or inflation, whichever is less. Remember back to that upward trajectory of the blue line? That wasn't us. Remember the downward trajectory of the red line? That is us. We continually reduce to provide and rely on public trust so that we can take care of people. And far beyond our control in Sioux Falls, South Dakota is our continually growing group of people, our children of poverty. Poverty is measured by the federal free and reduced lunch guidelines. These children of poverty do not come to school prepared to learn. They don't come to school having the experiences that your children had or my children have. They don't come to school with hope or their basic needs met. In elementary school, they're far behind in background knowledge to be able to succeed with basic literacy and numeracy skills. By middle school, they're searching for a sense of belonging to be accepted, and by high school, they give up. They're behind in credits. They're typically involved in the court system. And if they're lucky, when they drop out, they're able to get a minimum wage job. In this community, children in poverty have increased by 77% since 1998. However, remember the declining red line? Since 1998, we have not received the necessary state funding to provide the programs these children need. Some of you may be surprised to learn that on January 3rd, 2011, we had 46% of our children in the Sioux Falls School District at the elementary level living in poverty, 41% of our middle school students, and 33.8% of our high school students living in poverty. By ethnicity, 52% of our Asian students, 85% of our black students, 80% of our Hispanic students, and 84% of our Native American students in this community live in poverty. We have 346 preschool children at risk, living in poverty on a waiting list waiting for early intervention. Since 1998, our children who do not yet know the language well enough to succeed in a regular classroom has increased by 241%. We have over 52 languages spoken in our homes with some 70-some dialects. So what are some of the programs that we've had to provide for these children? All day, every day kindergarten, immersion and ELL programs, literacy programs, Native American connections, comprehensive behavior programs, high school transition programs, dropout prevention programs, nearly $6 million of necessary program beyond the dollars we receive in state aid. You may be wondering, how do we provide? We reduce in order to provide. We have been doing this for several years, and we know what it means to tighten our belts. We've held average salary increases to 2.3%. We've reduced our administration to student ratio by 20%. We've increased class size by 2%. We've implemented combination classrooms, reduced supplies and materials. We've significantly reduced the middle school athletic program. And we have severely limited the counselor to student ratio. The national recommendation would be 1 to 250, and we have 1 to 420. We've significantly limited our nurse to student ratio. The national recommendation would be 1 to 750, and we have 1 to 1,000. We have significantly limited our social worker to student ratio. The national recommendation would be 1 to 400, and we have 1 to 2,673 children. And this is only a part of the list. How do we provide? We reduce to provide, and we rely on public trust. In our community, we have a $5 million opt-out on the books, and to date, our administration and our school board has only drawn down 2.7 of that opt-out. The Finance Action Network, our school board, business manager Todd Veek and myself heavily rely upon and value the expertise of this group of volunteers appointed by the Chamber to scrutinize our every expenditure against our revenues and make recommendation. And finally, partnerships. Beyond the reductions we make within our walls, the partnerships in this community are what help us provide for these children. From Falls Community Health to Feeding South Dakota to Lutheran Social Services to the Sioux Empire United Way, our financial institutions of Vera and Sanford. Our children would not succeed without the partnerships we have. So what is the impact of the governor's across-the-board cuts? In addition to the multiple years of providing and relying on public trust, even if we reduced administration by 10%, never ran a bus again, discontinued the middle school model, removed every athletic and fine arts program, and reduced our salaries according to the negotiated agreement, we would still not arrive at $10 million. However, I can assure you, we will arrive at underserved children and a poor quality education system.